Thank you all for joining. So as David mentioned, my name is Tamara Lopez. I'm the Assistant Director of the Award and Account Setup Team, which is our asset group here at SRS. And Laura and I are going to talk about budget entry first. So to give a little bit of background on this, I wanted first to talk about how the budget forecasting project started out, and by going into the working group that was formed and some of the thoughts that came out of that, the direction that came from there that then went into the budget entry functionality that we're going to talk about today that's available in Maestro. So the budget forecasting working group was initiated by the Vice President of Research at the university around fall 2020. And the charge with it was to create a system-wide representation, a software system that could be used system-wide, and really analyze current budget forecasting efforts, define what those enterprise-wide systems requirements would be, and then work towards implementing that. So as part of this working group, the leadership of it was through the Maestro Steering Committee. That committee has agency and university heads and executives from main campus, all of the agencies that are in the system, as well as some of the regional campuses. So there was a wide, diverse representation, not only on the working group, but also with the leadership committee. And so part of that, we started looking at, okay, budget forecasting, what we're talking about with that is thinking, the VPR said, well, our researchers, the research community needs to have a tool that they can use. They've got all these various projects running. They know that they have a number of graduate students or staff members that are involved in that, maybe some co-PIs. So looking at across my portfolio of research, how many graduate students can I afford to fund for this coming academic year or next academic year when they start doing those projections? Is there a piece of equipment that I need to purchase? Looking at travel to go to conferences. So really thinking about what they needed to accomplish and the various positions, staff members, students that were involved and how they could fund that. So that's the kind of where this budget forecasting was born out of, thinking along that line and figuring out how the system could accomplish that or be a tool to help accomplish it. So as the conversations developed and moved forward, part of the leadership and working group, started thinking about, okay, so if that's our goal, we need a baseline. We need a foundation that's in there so that we have data to work with when we start making those projections. So a lot of work goes in at the proposal stage. Researchers and many of you, I'm sure, in the department are working as that liaison with proposal administrators and building out the budgets that are going into the various sponsors. So those budgets are including a lot of personnel detail, the breakout for travels, for supplies, other cost, indirect cost. So a lot of effort goes in there. And whenever those proposals are awarded, then we wanted that to be the baseline, that be the starting point. So currently there was not anything in the system that was capturing those proposal budgets that were awarded other than uploading the Excel spreadsheet. So part of the requirement was to build out something that captured that in the system that could be utilized for forecasting efforts. So phase one was budget entry in Maestro, and that's what we're going to look at today, going in and looking at the functionality that's been developed so far and what information you could pull from it in your position in the departments. So this implemented at SRS on April 1st. So we have a couple of months of data that we've been putting in and starting out going through the process. This budget entry is phase one of the budget forecasting project. So we're excited about that. And I'm going to turn it over now to Laura Hollingsworth to really go into the specifics of the budget entry functionality.
Good morning, everyone. As Tamara mentioned, I'm Laura Hollingsworth. I'm a team lead with the asset team. And today I'm going to be sharing some of the functionality with you on our new budget entry screens. So before we jump into that, I wanted to just discuss a little bit about the account structure. That has not changed. So this functionality has not changed at all the way our accounts have been structured, meaning if you have a multi-year project that has those carry forward requirements, we will still be establishing each year in its separate account with its own affiliated support accounts. And then if you had a project that had budget splits and we needed to have separate support accounts there, within the same account, that will still be processed the exact same way. So there will be no changes there, nothing to adjust to when it comes to that kind of thing. As we're discussing budget entry, we'll be really using two different terms here. There's a sponsored budget and a financial budget. So we're going to get into the details of what that looks like and the different details that are offered. But first, I wanted to just provide a very general definition for these. The sponsored budget, this is going to be your more detailed information. It's going to split it out per year, and you'll also be able to see detailed personnel information, salary and fringe figures, as well as effort months. And this is kind of going to look like a proposal budget that you're probably used to seeing before. This is the budget that you would want to use if you were trying to work on those account projections, that kind of thing, because it's going to have the most detail that will be beneficial to you. The next budget that we're going to talk about is the financial budget. This includes the more general lump sum totals. You will be able to see it per year, so that's a little bit more detailed than what we had been able to see previously in FAMOUS. But this is much more like that FAMOUS budget, where you'll see the general subcodes that you're used to seeing, and you'll see the amounts listed there for each category. Okay, so now we're going to start looking at some of the screens in Maestro, and I will do a demo here after we kind of talk generally through them. But this is our initial budget screen. What I wanted to show you here is at the top of the screen, you see FAMOUS billing project. There you have a toggle. So if we did have one of those multi-year projects that had the carry forward where we needed to have multiple SLs or multiple accounts within the same M record, you'd be able to use that drop-down feature there to choose the right account for the information that you're looking for. And once you've once you've identified the correct account, underneath in the account section, you'll be able to see all of the support accounts associated with it. And from there, once you were to highlight each individual line that you were looking for, at the bottom section, you can see there where you can choose between the sponsored budget and the financial budget. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the sponsored budget. This is going to be a reflection of the awarded proposal captured in Maestro. So as long as our budget comes in, our award comes in and it matches the amounts that were awarded in the proposal, you're going to see the exact same information there. If for some reason our award comes in and it's a little bit different, then your asset team will work with the project administrator to revise it, either by prorating that budget or getting with the PI behind the scenes to adjust it to make those figures work for what they're needing. But basically that's going to have, again, your sponsored budget that has that more detail that kind of matches that proposal budget. The budgets are loaded by what is being called a sequence for the full period of performance. And what we mean there is each sequence is going to be each year of funding. So when you look at a proposal budget, if it's a 5-year budget, say for NIH, you will see each year separated out individually. And that's the same thing that you would see within the sponsored budget. Just instead of being called years, they will be considered sequences. And when we do receive a new award, if the project is for 5 years, your sponsored budget will be loaded for the entire 5 years, regardless of whether we've received all of the money or not. And the purpose for that is to help with those projections. The detail here can be shown by your support account. Once you open that up, you'll also see it by budget period, which is the sequences, and then also by your pools and categories. Also, you'll be able to see that detailed personnel information that I mentioned, and I will show you those screens here in just a minute so you can kind of see how that looks and see that detailed information. Okay, so here is our general sponsor budget screen. You'll see here the things that I had mentioned. This is for one support account, but you can see there that we have a sponsor budget entered for 3 sequences or 3 different years, all within the same support account. And if you notice on the salary and wages pool and the benefits pool, those are hyperlinks. So if you were to click on those items, that will take you to this next screen, which is your salary detail. So here you can see we have our named PI, 2 co-PIs, and then graduate students. And it has your salary, fringe, and person months listed there for each individual for each sequence. Our financial budget. Some of the new functionality that we have here is that SRS has the ability to post directly from Maestro to Famous. This amount that's listed here is going to correspond with the obligated funds that the sponsor has provided to us, and that will be posted into Famous. The detailed salary information, as mentioned, cannot be seen with this option. However, you still will be able to see the sequences, which is a nice feature. So here's what this screen looks like. It does look pretty similar to your sponsored budget, but if you notice, we have 3 columns per section or per sequence section there. So the first column is your sponsored budget of what was proposed. Posted is the second column, which means that would be amounts that we had already posted for that sequence. Those are the amounts that are already in Famous. And then the third line is your for posting, and that would be in the amounts that we're either adding to or removing for posting into Famous. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to note, because we have been confirming for you all that the information that is on the financial budget should match Famous, and that gets posted into Famous and it should match. So the thing that can be a little bit confusing is when you have those different sequences, say you have posted all of year 1, part of year 2, but not all of the full sponsored budget amount. When you look at the financial budget screen, that first column there with the block of orange, that is your cumulative total that has posted to Famous for that support account. And when you look at that column next to FRS 76 in Famous, you'll see that those amounts match. So that's kind of an easy way to add those up without having to really get more into it with a calculator and all of that. You'll be able to see that information right there. Okay, so now we're going to go into the demo and basically just kind of work through those same items. I decided to use the same project just for consistency's sake. So first, when you log into Maestro and you choose this account, it'll pull up your general screen. And actually, what I'd like to do before we kind of get into that is I'm going to talk about this specific project just a little bit so that you can understand kind of why it's established and set up the way that it is. So this is an NSF project. It has a 3-year period of performance, but with this particular project, each year of funding is being received separately. So at this point, we've only received 1 year of funding. This is a TEAS project, and for TEAS with their organization, if they have co-PI and PIs in different departments, they'll each have separate support accounts. So here we have the co-PI, and the PI is in electrical. We have another co-PI that is in distance learning. So we are going to have 2 support accounts here. So we'll have 3 different sequences. However, this will all be in the same account number. So let's go back over and we will kind of start walking through these screens within Maestro. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is go to that budget screen. This is the initial screen that I showed a screenshot of earlier. Up here, again, you have that billing project. You can see here that when we try to toggle down, there are no other options. You would have those there if you had active billing projects, multiple active billing projects associated with this M record. So now what we are going to do is we're going to look at this first support account across all of the different budget screens. So it's important to note here that you need to highlight the line. You don't want to click the hyperlink here. It will send you to a different screen that's going to just show you some different information there, like your period performance and that kind of thing, but it won't show you your budgets. So highlight that line. And then in the bottom section, you'll be able to see your sponsored budget, as well as your financial budget history, which will show you anything that has been posted within the financial budget tab previously. And then famous history, that's going to go and show you anything that was pre-financial budget, pre-budget entry. So we're going to start out with looking at the sponsored budget. You're going to click this entry ID number and it will pull it up. Here you can see that we have all three sequences as mentioned. Again, whenever we receive an award, if it's a multi-year project, we'll enter the sponsored budget for all of the years, regardless of whether we've received all of the funding up front or not. So here you can see we have the 3 years of funding and the sponsored budget has been entered for each year. So next we can look at the detailed salary information. You can click on that hyperlink on salary and wages pool and it will pull up this next screen for you. Again, you have that detailed information here and you can see the amount that was proposed for each member or each participant within your project for salary, fringe, and then the person months for each year. So something that we wanted to point out and some of the functionality that has been added specifically for that projections, budget, forecasting, that kind of thing, is this line here. So there's a couple different things going on with this line that I'd like to highlight for you. The first is that we have the capability to list individuals as to be named. As we all know, sometimes we don't have individuals hired yet. Sometimes we have individuals that maybe have moved on from A&M in between the time that we've created the proposal to the time that the project was awarded. And so we know that we'll have a co-PI or a graduate student, but we don't have that individual named quite yet. So Maestro was able to create that functionality for us so that we could list those individuals as to be named. We can list multiple lines with to be named. The amounts and those things will be correlated to that specific position. So there's no limit on the number of those that can be added. With this particular line, we had graduate students as to be named. And when you look at the person months, you'll see that that's listed as 16.4 for each individual year. So we know that graduate students, their full time is only 6 months. So basically what this information is telling you is that we had the ability to hire multiple grad students. Within the proposal, they were all listed at the same person months, the same salary and fringe rate. So we lumped it all in to one line. So there, if you wanted to fully fund 2 grad students, you'd be able to do that with an additional third partially funded. Okay, so now we're going to head back and we're going to look at our financial budgets. You just hit that back button. We are still going to look at the same support account, so that's still highlighted, but now we're going to toggle to the financial budget tab. And we'll click on that entry ID to see that information there. And that will pull up your financial budget. So here, as we had mentioned, you've got your sponsored budget on the first tab. The same as when we looked at the sponsored budget screen by itself, you do see that information for all 3 sequences. However, we've only received funding for 1 year. So when you look at the posted, you can see the amount that we received so far. That also correlates over here to your cumulative number. Those currently match. Once we get to the next year of funding, and we receive that in, should that match the amount that was proposed for year 2, you would see that information first entered as in the for posting line. And then when we post it, it would move over to the posted totals, add to your cumulative amount, and you would be able to see all of that information right there. Okay, and one last thing that I wanted to show you all is these project summary tabs. This information is going to be really helpful when it comes to your sponsored budget amounts. You'll be able to see those amounts per sequence or per period there. And you have the ability to see them like this in the table, or you can also see this chart that has the more detailed information there as well. This is going to be the information that defaults, the chart is going to default for most of you. Okay, so now I'm going to switch it back over to Tamara and let her discuss some of the Maestro roles with you.
Thank you, Laura, for that demo. Okay, so many of you in the department should have the project viewer role in Maestro. So you will have view access to all the sponsored budget whenever you log in. So it's under the project module. And then whenever you pull up that project record, it's the budget screen over on the left menu. And so you'll be able to have view access. SRS is the one that has the budget administrator role to actually do the entry there. However, you will be able to view it. And again, like Laura covered for sponsored budget, you've got that category breakout per budget year, per funding year. That way you can see every category across the various years to know what's coming, what to expect for the future incremental funding periods. If it's funded a year at a time, like in our example that she showed with the NSF project, you would know what to expect for years 2 and 3 by looking ahead. And then also we wanted to note that the personnel detail built this functionality in to really capture what's being put into the proposal budgets, so that information isn't just lost from the time of proposal and then just not utilized. But now we get to enter it in the system to help you. And whenever you go in to look at these, you can see maybe this could be a source for determining your payroll allocations by project. At least give you a starting point if you need to make confirmations with your researchers, but you have information there available that you could use to say, okay, you proposed these personnel would be working this amount of time, or these positions were going to be a part of the project. And so we feel like this could be a benefit to you guys. One other note, if you're working with a researcher, they don't have project viewer access, but they do have the researcher reviewer role. And so they can go into Maestro on the researcher portal and pull up their projects over there. And whenever it's pulled up, you've got all those tabs along the top, like in this screenshot here. And there is a new module called budget at the end that's circled. They can click on that to get this view of the sponsored budget summary, which was that table that Laura showed at the end of her demo. At this time, the researcher portal has not been developed out further. That's going to be in the next phase. So they don't have access to view that personnel detail that you would have on the project viewer side. So if they need to see that level of detail, you may need to help them by gathering that information off the project side, or of course, your project administrator at SRS as well is available to pull information that y'all might need. But this does show the summary view by sequence or budget year, as well as the category totals across years for the researcher. So that is all that we have so far for budget entry, and I'm going to turn it over to Natalie for cost share.
Okay, thanks, Tamara. Yes, like she mentioned, I'm Natalie Bayansky. I'm the Assistant Director of Post-Award here at SRS. And so I'm going to go over the new cost share module and some of the new functionality that we developed with Maestro with this new module. So similar to the budget entry group, I wanted to give a little bit of a history on the working group and how we arrived at this point. So previously, the cost share requirements were entered in famous SPR, and it did not provide a lot of functionality for our office in terms of monitoring expenses, as well as the other system members who use the SPR module as well. Report preparations were a very manual process. There was no way to download that information out of Famous to manipulate a report to prepare to send to the sponsor. Also, a lack of transparency. There were only a limited number of users who could see famous SPR. So our researchers and departments really couldn't monitor independently what the requirements were, as well as the associated expenses that were coming in on a monthly basis. In addition to that, there was numerous manual accounting entries that needed to be performed in order to maintain the cost share data. So for example, fringe expenses that posted to state accounts, those were needing to be manually posted. IDC as well was another manual entry that we needed to perform in order to maintain the expenditure data. I just wanted to go over kind of the timeline of where we're at and how we approach the go live for this new module. So on April 11th, we trained all of our cost share specialists and then went live on April 12th. In between April 12th and April 20th, we had this data entry cleanup is how we kind of defined it. And that's because there was a lot of new fields added to the cost share module. And so we needed to go through the effort of updating all of that data so that the module could perform as it should. And then on April 20th is when we did our post-award training with all of the project administrators. So we've only been in the system for about 2 months now, or sorry, 2 months. 2 months, sorry, I'm getting my months off. But in that time, we've seen a lot of efficiencies gained with moving to this new module. So we're very excited about it. So I just want to go over the screens a little bit, and kind of like Laura did, I'll go into a demo shortly after. So this first screen that you come to when you're looking at the new module is the requirement screen. And this has a lot more detail than what was previously in famous SPR. So kind of going column to column, that reportable checkbox that you see there, we are checking that box if we need to generate a report to the sponsor, and that feeds into the functionality of generating the report, which I'll go over later. Mandatory versus voluntary, this is defined at the proposal stage. So this information is flowing over, and we've noted that here on this side as well. Cost sharing group is also a new field added to the cost share module. This defines where the source of funding is coming from. So member cost equates to an actual famous account that is created and that we will link to this new module. In kind generally comes from an outside party. In the example I'll go over, it's actually coming internal, but there is no account linked to it. So we've designated it as in kind. And then lastly, there's subaward costs. So if we have a subawardee on a project and they are also contributing cost share, we are denoting that requirement here and tracking expenses appropriately. The member column identifies the member account that we're using for cost share, and then the account is the actual account that was created and linked to track the cost share expenses. The cost share organization is the actual department that houses this member account, so that will pre-populate based off the account entry that's made. Same with responsible person or primary responsible person, that will also default based off of your entry on the account level. IDC and unrecovered IDC rate base, that the IDC rate is not a new field, but we are now defining that on a account line. So our cost share specialists are entering that once they go to make their entries, and then the base will drive how the IDC is automatically calculated under the transactions tab. The direct and indirect budget are now split out. Previously, we would only have a total required under the account line. So now you can see both direct and indirect, which I know is helpful for the departments because they're generally more concerned with what the direct required amount is, whereas the IDC amount is auto-calculated. And then you see your total required, and then moving on to the description, just to give a little bit more context around exactly what that cost share account should be supporting. Next, a little bit further down on that same page, we have the requirements details. So this is also a new functionality that came with the cost share module, and this further breaks out each requirement line into a budget. So if I highlight that first line, you can see that we have the salaries, benefits, and tuition broken out that should substantiate that full direct required amount that was up a little bit higher. And this detail entry is what is generating the report that comes out of Maestro. So these budget amounts will pull together so that you can see your overall cumulative required budget for cost share. Okay, moving on to the next tab, which is the cost sharing transactions. So this top section is the same view where you can see each requirement listed as well as the required budget entry amount. But here, moving on a little bit further, you see we have our actuals and remaining now populated, and it's also broken out between direct and IDC and the total amount as well. And the same is for the remaining amount. Moving a little bit further down, you can see that we have that same budget category detail broken out, and then you can see the required, actuals, and remaining there as well. So like I mentioned earlier, now we have the ability to run a cost sharing report directly out of Maestro. It does not need to be manually prepared. We can now define a range of expenses that we want to view, and then this will generate the report for us. So I'll go over that a little bit more in the demo so you can see how that works and how the report looks once it's generated. Okay, so let me navigate over to Maestro. So when you come to the general page for this M record, I'm going to navigate over to the billing project screen. And now you will see that we have this new cost sharing tab here down below once you have the correct billing project highlighted. You'll see this period. Generally, there's one period per billing project. In some unique instances, we do have multiple that may need to be split out by year. But like I mentioned, in most years or most billing projects, you will just see one period. So I'll go ahead and click on this period. And then we come to that requirements page that I spoke about earlier. At the top, you'll see that we have our period of performance outline, the total required, and total actual, that just as a quick summary of this particular project. So like I mentioned, as I'm navigating down, I can see all the requirements outlined and entered, along with this detail, if it's reportable or not, and how that will feed over to our generated report. And then going down, you see this detailed requirements per cost share line. So if I click on the next one, then this information changed, and you'll see that the bottom line figure here correlates to the direct required that we had as the overall commitment for that cost share line. So then moving over to the cost share transactions screen or tab, again, you're seeing the same information again, but now you have actual expenditure information reflected against your requirements. So here's your actual split out by direct and indirect, as well as the remaining amount. And so I have this first line highlighted, and then I'm going down to the budget detail where I can see it's split out again, and I have my total required, actuals, and remaining. So a little bit further down is where you can see the actual transaction. So let me click on one that has it. And so see, I have my salaries line highlighted, and then I can see all of the salary expenses that I've posted under that particular line. I can also further filter down if I just want to see 1 month, and I can put in a transaction date within the range that I'm seeking, and it'll filter down the data to what you need. You can also export to Excel at any point if you need to manipulate the data. One thing to note, so as I mentioned earlier with the salary, so salaries and fringe, these are automatically feeding over now. We don't need to have a manual entry, so those should be real time as each month closes. The ones that still require manual entry, for example, are in kind. You'll see that we have these manual designations next to it, and so that just means that we have the documentation on hand to support the expenditure, and then our cost share specialists make those entries. Same with sub-awardee cost share. So once we are processing their invoices for payment and can see the cost share detail that's printed on their invoice, we will use that information to enter a manual entry to capture that cost share expense. Okay. Let me then navigate back to the first landing page, so that first tab for the cost share, and then just give you a demo on how you can generate the cost share report. So this is the icon that you will click to generate a report. In this instance, I will run it for the entire period up to, we'll say last month, and then generate the report. So this is what the report looks like after it's been generated. You may notice that it looks very similar to the invoices that are generated for normal billing on our projects. So again, all of that required information per budget category detail is now feeding over here, so we can get that cumulative total. You see period expenses, cumulative expenses, and then the amount required. As I go down, you'll see it then summarized by subcode. And then you start moving into account detail. So each cost share account line now will have a transaction list with each account. Also, it can generate payroll data, and so it'll give a payroll snapshot if the sponsor requires this level of detail. Okay. Moving on. So there's a couple of things I wanted to note before I go back over to Maestro to show you another functionality. So one thing I wanted to note was changes to the sponsored project summary. So previously you were used to seeing on the SPS that there was cost share requirement data listed there, but now we have started that process much sooner. So when the SPS goes out, the requirements may not yet be defined in the cost share module, but you will still continue to receive that communication one-on-one with your cost share specialist as to, okay, what is your commitment for this department and what are the associated amounts, so that you can identify the accounts. Once the accounts are identified, then the cost share requirements tab will be completely filled out, and then you can reference this tab for the overall requirements for this award. And then lastly, I just wanted to go over the cost share search screen, which I think is another really exciting enhancement for this module, which allows us to kind of look at all the cost share projects that we have and further filter it down based off the need of the user. So let me navigate back to Maestro, and I'll show you where that is. So if we're on this same left-hand side, you're going to scroll all the way down to the cost sharing search option. And here's where you can further define exactly what you want to see. So if I'm a department and I want to see all cost share commitments for my department, regardless if it's on another department's project. So if Aero is a lead on the project, but material science is a co-PI and has a cost share commitment there, it will still generate the cost share commitment if you use this cost share organization search function. So if I put that in and then put in material science, of course it doesn't work for me when I'm trying to do a demo. Here we go. Put in material science and then run the search, and it will generate all commitments for the material science department. I can also export this to Excel and manipulate the data from there. If I want to further define this, maybe by PI, I can do that same search function as well. So hopefully this is helpful to the departments in order to specifically see, okay, what financial or cost share commitments do I have out there, relevant to my department, rather than previously we could only really filter that by the lead organization. So that really kind of wraps up all of the topics for the cost share screen. And now we'll open it up for questions for anybody that may have some.
Very good, Tamara and Laura and Natalie. Those are some really great enhancements that have been added to Maestro, and many thanks go out to the various working groups and the Maestro leadership and their programmers for being able to create these very helpful screens that I'm sure will help in forecasting budgets, and then also, of course, help the departments in managing their cost share. Well, if you have any questions out there, you can either go ahead and add them through the chat, or we're welcome for you to unmute and just ask a question. Well, there's a question in the chat. It says, for cost share actuals, are they real time or for previous month end or updated overnight?
Yes, very good question. So right now they will pull in at month end. So once month closes, which is generally the 2 to 3 days into the beginning of the next month, that is when the transactions will feed over. That is when the IDC will automatically calculate as well. So that is when you can see the most up-to-date information.
But if you are doing it in the middle of the month and you need transactions, there is a way to pull as of today manually. You have a button on the screen where you can pull manually as of today all transactions.
Yes, thank you, Leonardo.
Great information. Here's a question that came in for the budget area. With the sponsored budget entry in Maestro, do we have to spend exactly as entered, or can we still adjust if needed? For example, use some of our supply money to fund an extra trip for travel.
That's a good question. So no, not necessarily. You don't have to. Lori might jump in a minute, but you wouldn't necessarily have to spend exactly according to the sponsored budget, because that's really the essence of why the forecasting system was needed. So in this example, you realize, oh, I need to have an extra trip to go to a conference and present some research that wasn't expected, or we didn't need to buy as much supplies as we thought, or perhaps postdoc was going to be hired, but instead you want to fund 2 graduate students. So those type of things, you can use the information that's there kind of as a starting point or a guide, but you wouldn't necessarily be required to stick to it exactly, depending maybe on scope of the project or.
Right. So just to add on to that just a little bit, it does kind of depend on your terms and conditions of the project, obviously. If you have a very strict sponsor, you might have to consider that. You might not be able to spend outside. However, it doesn't necessarily get as detailed as, 3 different items of supplies. It doesn't get that detailed, obviously. But when it comes to anytime that you would have a situation where you would need to get sponsor approval for a budget revision, typically in those situations, your project administrator should be updating that sponsored budget if we get any kind of official approval from the sponsor at that time. So you may see that change throughout the life of the project as any revisions were to come through.
Very good. Another question did come through the chat here for cost share. If we currently, and this is from like a department administrator, if we currently don't have access to run cost share reports, who do we contact regarding gaining access?
Generally, there is a member-specific person who can help assess your access and make sure that you can see this. But if you either want to shoot me an email, I know Maestro support can also help filter you to the right person as well, just depending on what member you're associated with.
Okay, and I can add to that we did not develop specific reports for the departments because we were trying to add to that kosher search screen pretty much every field that is maybe relevant to you. So the idea was go to the search screen, select the fields that you need, and export to Excel, and you have your report because you can put any criteria there pretty much. The reports that you've seen that Natalie demoed today are reports that are exclusively used by kosher specialists to produce reports for the sponsor. So I'm assuming you didn't mean those reports because you will never have access to those reports that are for the specialists that are doing the job.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I read it as cost share reports in terms of the cost share screen and exporting to the cost share search screen, but yes.
Very good. Here's a question on budgets. I was looking at Maestro and pulled up a few project records for researchers I work with, but the records do not have a sponsored budget entered. Should I be seeing one?
We went live with this implementation on April 1st. So for any new award setups that were done April 1 and later, yes, there will be a sponsored budget for those. And then for existing awards, as an action comes around that has funding attached, then asset is setting it up at that point. So for example, if you have an existing project, but it's up for continuation in July, then you won't see that sponsored budget entered until we get the continuation in July. And at that point, we're setting it up for the funded action that's there and any future part of the project. So we're not going back and doing a back entry because, you know, the time is in the past, so it wouldn't do any good. But whenever we have those existing projects come around, we are setting them up at that time for going forward.
It looks like that may have kind of answered that. There's a question that came in and said, with the new implementation, 4/1/22, how much historical information was included? For example, does the implementation only include open projects in FY22?
Yeah, so yeah, the existing ones that were set up prior to that, we will get to them as they come around. If they have a supplement or continuation, future funding, and it's coming back through the award setup team. But otherwise, if everything was awarded previously, prior to the April 1, then you won't see the sponsored budget on those.
Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning.